Sounds good. All right, well, thanks everybody. Excited to kick things back off again. And so as the topic shows, we're going to talk about how to maintain product-led growth in a sales-led world, which feels kind of contradictory, but I think we can parse out some good takeaways to leave the day with. So wanted to start by defining product-led growth versus sales-led growth. I know there's been some definitions thrown around today, but I'd love to get our guest perspective on how we would all define it. So Hans, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I think, your product is selling itself. It's doing the work versus a bunch of people individually connecting with a customer doing the work. So it's mostly about leveraging software and the human effort that does go into building that to scale kind of without friction and without a ceiling. And that's the big differentiator, I think, with product-led growth, which doesn't necessarily mean that the product team is the one in the leadership position, although you kind of generally are in that scenario. Mostly you're using software to do the work of people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sales-led, I would say, is I like to think of that more of an army to really drive growth, and versus product-led, it's sort of self-sufficient, sort of a robot doing its own thing. So that's the way I think of it in simple terms.
Yeah.
Maybe one add, I think if you think about it in economic terms, if you're trying to look at customer acquisition costs or conversion costs, not acquisition, but like marginal costs to acquire a user, product-led growth is characterized by diminishing costs as you get more and more users, whereas sales-led growth, which you may need that army in the beginning, but sales-led growth typically becomes exponentially more expensive as you scale because hiring more people means you have to hire more people to manage the people and so on and so forth. And so it actually becomes exponentially more expensive to grow just by sales.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great delineation of product-led growth doesn't mean that you're led specifically by the product organization, but that the product is the key driver for acquisition, growth, et cetera. So I think it's important because I think there's a common misconception that like product-led growth ignores marketing and sales when it really doesn't. That's a good call out. So to kind of set the stage for like our backgrounds as we talk about how to maintain product-led growth in a sales-led environment, could we go around and just explain how like our companies operate in a sales-led way today and kind of what that motion looks like?
Yeah, I'll start. My first product organization, Infusionsoft, it's a SaaS marketing automation platform. They were very heavy, and I think still are, sales-led. So that was my first sort of exposure of that. And then the second company I worked at, Active Campaign, they were primarily product-led growth. They had 14-day trial. They had a lot of self-service options. Even just the mindset. I mean, the CEO was a developer by trade. So I think just the foundation of that product being built was very product-minded. And then HubSpot, I think, did it really well out of all the companies I've worked at. And I think they were probably more of a hybrid of both, but primarily product-led first. And then the company I'm at now, I'm kind of taking you through the evolution, but Klaviyo does not have a trial. I think that's an area they're breaking into, is trying to do more self-service. So I think I've seen a blend of a lot of that, and I think there's pros and cons that we'll talk about today for each.
I think I've seen kind of the whole spectrum too. Spent time as CPO at Flipagram, which was acquired by ByteDance, became TikTok. That definitely was not a sales-led kind of company because you just had so many users that you couldn't. And then I was CPO at Weedmaps, which is a cannabis technology company, and that was a mixture that had a good number of consumers, obviously, that you didn't talk to individually, but on the other side of it, as a marketplace, we did talk to dispensaries, we did sell directly to them, and brands and other things. And then currently, actually, I'm in the process of leaving over to go to Instagram, but at Crexy, as CPO, we had, again, a combination. We're a marketplace for commercial real estate. So we have brokers that we're selling to directly, and a lot of our sales team calls them directly. But we also have people that are looking for properties, and we're not necessarily talking to them directly to sell them. So we have a combo of sales-led, product-led aspects of our product.
Yeah, and it's the same at Lindio, where it's kind of a hybrid between the three, right? Like our primary acquisition driver is through paid marketing today. We're trying to change that. But we do have a product-led aspect where we're leveraging product-led SEO to drive organic traffic, and there's no sales barrier to someone getting into our application and applying for a business loan and kind of getting to the end of the funnel. Well, the end of the funnel. When they get to the end, the part that we're trying to solve now to make it completely product-led is to where they get automatic offers back from our lending marketplace. But today it's very much gated by our sales team and very manual behind-the-scene processes. And so in that way, it's still very sales-led, to where the funding managers, as we call our sales team, is really that gatekeeper of what offers even get presented, right? And are there potentially issues with what offers the funding managers are presenting, and how do we mitigate some of the risk of kind of the agent principal issues that can come up in those type of environments. So cool. Now that we have kind of the background of the sales-led experiences that we've had, I guess as the landscape of the market shift around us, a lot of times we see new verticals in B2B that are shifting over to a product-led growth motion, which potentially poses a competitive threat. So how do we address that, and how could it potentially work against us if we tried to continue to try to scale a sales-led model while our competitors around us are experiencing growth through a product-led growth motion?
Maybe I can kick it off with that.
Sure.
I think oftentimes in the earlier stages of a company, you're building something, you have some indication, hopefully, that the market's going to want it. And so the sales team is very helpful because you haven't yet maybe had the chance to build as much as you would like, or maybe not as much information as you would need to build a successful product-led growth product. And so the sales team is out there like drumming up business for you. As you transition, I think the risk of continuing to be sales-led is that by and large, your input from sales is going to be like, I got an objection today. This is what the customer wants. And you add that up times N 1,000 customers, and all of a sudden you're building what everybody tells you they want, and none of your customers are product managers. Some of them will be very prescient, don't get me wrong, but they'll often be telling you what hurts them today. By the time you build it and come out with it, that's yesterday. So the stuff you're building needs to be in the future, not because you have some principle about being innovative necessarily, although I hope you do. It's that you can't build something and release it today. Now, if you could, and you could do that cheaply, then maybe you could have an advantage. So there are moments when you can. When you're a small startup and you're reacting fast, you kind of can do that. But as you get bigger, by and large, your product is going to become more complex, your software is more complex, it takes you more time and planning, you got to be more selective about what you build. That's where you need to transition and lean on what you've learned from sales and continuously learn from sales, but start to shift towards being product-led, meaning you're trying to make your product do the common job that sales is running into. Now, sales is going to always, hopefully, get to a point where they're going after bigger accounts, more custom and so forth, so they'll probably continue to do that. But I would imagine as you're succeeding and you're starting to have a larger addressable market, what you hope to find is things that will be common across most of your customers. Those are the things that you should start to pull into your product because those are the things you don't need your salespeople doing. They're similar, mundane, whatever. Put it in the product. Get the product to do that job. Leave the more custom, personalized, expensive stuff to the sales team until you can figure that out too, eventually. But I mean, the threat would be you start to get driven by the wrong signals because you are overwhelmed by just what customers are objecting to.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like from Lindio, we're kind of seeing where along those lines, the only way we can scale our growth is if we scale headcount of our sales team, right? And so even if we wanted to scale top line growth, the unit economics don't change because you still have the operational costs, you have commissions you have to pay out. And so if you truly want to scale in a way that unit economics are impacted in a net positive, you have to figure out what are our bottlenecks and how do we automate those bottlenecks. And right now, as I mentioned earlier, it's making sure that we get those offers that can be accepted and the transactions can be cleared without the necessity of having human intervention. But that doesn't mean necessarily you cut out humans. You still want optionality for your customers and your users if they need help or have questions. But the shift in what the role of that role is needs to probably shift according to what your model is trying to shift toward as well. So anything you would add, Mike?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point now of how do you go from really a sales-led to a sales-assisted model where your product is still leading primarily and there's still that human on the other side that I can talk to if I need to, or if you're targeting more upmarket customers, you're probably going to always have a pretty sales-driven pipeline. And so I think the majority, though, how do you shift it to that sales assisted? I think it's important. Just you don't want to add friction either. I think just putting my consumer hat on, it's for me personally, it's never fun talking to a salesperson. It can be daunting. It can be intimidating. You don't want that to scare away your customers either. So that's my take on it.
I guess another big key thing you need to do if you're going to transition is make sure the CEO is on board. If the CEO is not, you'll have a really hard time. And in fact, it probably just won't happen. But I think some ways you can get them on board is another core principle. If you continue to be sales-led and that cost curve goes exponentially the wrong direction, your whole company will start to spend its money on something that cannot actually scale. And that'll starve out the product innovation you're probably needing to do to make sure your product can actually go exponential. But if you're a software company, and I'm assuming if you're in product and here you've got your product is software, your advantage is going to be getting that software to actually scale exponentially in terms of the numbers of users that it's servicing, the number of customers that it's actually getting for the same amount of money. So I think the danger is you spend it all on hiring salespeople versus building things that can get cheaper as more people use it.
Yeah,
so convince your CEO, get that picture, that graph somewhere in front of them, and maybe that'll help.
For sure. So as we look at the sales-led environments that we live in, it can be scary when you start having those conversations of using the terminology product-led. And I've heard others say that, I stay away from that language because it is kind of scary for sales teams that, am I out of a job? So how have you seen it successful, or how would you go about trying to inject aspects of product-led into a very sales-heavy organization?
I'll give a very tactical answer here. So for me, I would say the first half of my product career, I never once really listened to sales calls, and that was a huge mistake. I only listened to support calls or success calls. And now I make it an effort to listen to those sales calls, whether it be live or through Gong, because I think a couple of things come out of that, right? It's really, what are pain points that the market's running into? They're looking for a solution to solve their problems. That comes out in almost every sales call. What are objections? We talked a little bit about that. And then really what's the market landscape, whether it be competitive or just the market in general. I think all of those things come out in those calls. So that's one thing I do pretty regularly now. And then the other more tactical thing is really partnering with product marketing. And I know a lot of organizations have enablement now. I think that's a really strategic sort of intersection, I think, between product and sales. And so partnering super close with my product marketing manager to really bridge that gap, I think has proven success.
Cool. Yeah, I'd say that, second that. I mean, any moment you've got some principle, some tactic that puts somebody on the defensive, kind of the best way to address the conflict or avoid it is to be on the same team, show them that you're on the same team. So be on the sales calls. Get sales involved in thinking longer term with the knowledge that whatever the customer is telling you now, you actually cannot deliver today anyways. So you have to think about what that customer is going to want in the future, which is actually in the favor of sales anyways. If your product is in more demand, sales will have an easier time selling. And if you build some of that kind of sales tactic into the product, they can focus on the more lucrative accounts, which is a higher ROI for them also. So you can be on the same side. I think that's the best way probably to address that.
I think also sales will see right through your bullshit if you're not. So
be sincere.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I've seen that I found kind of interesting. So like one is more of like a philosophical conversation of, in most cases in sales-led organizations, you probably are getting more leads than the sales team can or wants to follow up on. There's a certain level of product qualification, marketing qualification, whatever your flavor of qualification is. So how do you turn the tables to where you say, okay, this injection of product-led growth helps us to convert the leads that you weren't going to talk to anyway, and allows you to focus more time and effort on leads that maybe are warmer or that actually need sales hand-holding, and then having a discussion around who is that customer that needs more of the one-to-one interaction. Can we leverage data to figure that out? And how can we parse the experiences to at least start testing to see if this PLG injection would actually work for us? And posing it as a test that could be, a two-way door type of experience, where if it doesn't work, we can quickly come back from it. So that's one thing that I've seen work. And then kind of in a similar vein, like with Lendio now, it's like, okay, it's business loans. There are some that are literally not qualified, not just our arbitrary definition of marketing qualified or what have you. So how do we best serve them through a product-driven experience? Because frankly, like our sales team isn't going to touch them anyway, because if we can't help them, then they're not going to take the time and they're risking their commissions to go out of their way to help them. So how can we look for other ways to solve needs? They came to us for needs, so how can we identify those, and how can we address those through a completely product-driven experience? Because in this case in particular, there's this friction between like, should we go fully product-led and test into this automated experience at the expense of our revenue goals if we're taking away from the sales funnel? And so sometimes you get kind of this friction of, we know where we need to go to innovate, but we don't want to put our goals at risk. So how can we put our organizations in a position to where the current concerns around whatever metric we're trying to drive are less painful or less a problem, so that way we can truly focus on the innovation that we need to drive towards. So just from personal experience, there's a couple of things that I've seen. And any other thoughts that you guys would add before we move on?
yeah, I think I think that transition's probably a slow transition. Realistically, I would imagine a lot of organizations or founders or CPOs, maybe even CTOs, no offense, maybe think it's an overnight switch. Maybe the CEO maybe thinks that. I don't know, but
Yeah, you never know.
I had one.
But yeah,
Okay.
I don't think it is an overnight switch for a lot of reasons. I think it could be your product, it could be the pricing model. So I think that you have to be realistic about that transition as well.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's I think the difference between sales-led and product-led is more than it includes, and it already is a big thing to do. It includes a cultural shift, but it also includes a procedural shift. All the operational stuff that you have baked into the company, the stuff's going to have to shift over time, and so it can take quite a while. And oftentimes it contains changes in thinking that are pretty fundamental. So in our case at Crexi, right now, a lot of our subscriptions are sold to brokers. Commercial real estate transactions, eventually, you can imagine a time where software has now replaced and disintermediated the broker. As an owner, I can come on and self-service. I put my property up for sale, and I just all of a sudden get people interested, and they make offers, and it's all done electronically. how do you shift? And in that scenario, it can be very purely product led. It can be purely like, as an owner, I come on and I'm putting everything on by myself. Until that moment, there is a huge market and a huge amount of revenue to get from brokers, and making brokers actually superhuman. Now that's literally in conflict. So how do you do that? Well, it'll take a very intentional and careful transition. So it can take a long time, or it may never happen. It may be some competitor that comes in later on and then just disintermediates from the get-go.
Intentionality, I think, is a key word, because there's going to be risk in shifting, and your business is still in business, hopefully in a sales-led motion. And like, are you going after PLG because it's the catchphrase, the thing that you think you should be doing, or is there an actual business need driving the change? Yeah, I think that's a good call out. Cool. So, what aspects of sales-led? I know this is kind of positioned of like bashing sales-led, but it's not always the right path. So, what aspects of sales-led can help you win, even in a PLG environment?
For me, I've seen localization has always been kind of a tough thing to create on the product-led side, particularly like language. I'll use Spanish, for example, or Portuguese actually is another one too. I've seen a lot. If your product doesn't do localization well, or they're in the process of localizing, I think you're going to win the customer faster if you have a sales rep in market or that speaks Portuguese that can build that trust with the prospect. So that's one that I've seen is kind of hard to move over, I guess.
Yeah.
Up market as well. We talked a little bit about that. That always seems to be requiring a lot of hand holding. I don't know if that'll ever go fully product led.
Yeah. You can get your sales team is in front of customers as their job. There may be some low signal to noise in those scenarios. Customers may be objecting with whatever they want to say to get you off the phone. But there's an opportunity working with your sales team to really get close and intimate with your entire or a very large portion of your potential customer base. So leveraging that information and turning that into product insight is like opportunity number one. Another, as you said, if your product is really complex or your needs of your users are very diverse, the sales team can often create or get to that point of commonality in the minds of the users better than you might be able to do with an approach on your product. If you're not very sophisticated on product led and it's not personalized, the same message to every user may not work as well as an actual person finding out who you are and what your needs are and starting to say, here's how that product can help you. So that's definitely a scenario where sales is going to help. And then in terms of being able to turn on with almost a dial, like if you need more revenue, add more salespeople. If you're in that kind of market where there's a rich target base of customers, their most immediate ROI might be actually hiring salespeople. And that could generate revenue to fund your product development. So, there's a number of ways, of course, that you'd want to be able to leverage sales. And that may continuously exist. As you keep building up your product and carving off more and more of the user base, drawn into product-led, hopefully that sales team is getting more and more advanced and more kind of ambitious, going out after harder and harder, customers that return more and more money. That produces more insights for the product, and the product keeps growing too. So that would be a very good kind of symbiotic relationship that you'd want to have. Also with marketing.
Cool. So as we look across like our sales-led organizations today, I think some good arguments were presented in a previous talk about expanding the definition of what PLG means. And I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts around, like, if we can't get the CEO's buy-in to fully shift to where everything is productized, so to speak, what are maybe some adjacent ways that we could inject PLG into a sales-led motion, whether it's for retention or acquisition or different parts of the funnel? Any thoughts around that? I know this is not something that we prepped for, so I apologize. But
I actually have an example.
Okay.
So like I said, Crexy sells to brokers. sell subscriptions to brokers. But we also introduced a product called Intelligence a little while ago, which is data about the commercial real estate marketplace. So you might use Intelligence to figure out what past sales look like, what were comps, what is the economic environment, what's the migration patterns, what's the fire risk, flood risk, whatever it is. That's a product that didn't have a very well-defined kind of existing user that we had, because it was pretty much all of our users had some use of it. And so we introduced a self-service version of that. You could add a subscription for Intelligence, and there was a paywall, gates, and all that kind of stuff. And it was something small enough that our CEO was like, yeah, let's do that kind of online. Let's see how self-service works. And later on, we added a sales team. And so an interesting thing is you can kind of show like, what's the ROI on the sales team, what's the ROI on self-service, and then what is the type of user that tends to self-convert, and what is the type of user that tends to be converted by a salesperson. And now you've got kind of 2 data points, and you can illustrate all the stuff I've been talking about. Like, here's the data, this is what it looks like. And then it is what it is. Hopefully it tells the story that you want, or you can tell the story that you want with the data.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
I was just yeah, I would agree with that. Another example, HubSpot did this really well. They have a 90+ person growth team dedicated to driving product-led, but they've done it in a very hybrid model where they've injected things like onboarding videos and more freemium features at the low end. Again, moving towards more of that sales assisted. If you need, that's kind of the last step. If you need to actually talk to a human, we'll try to do, we'll guide you through the software as much as possible, self-guided through those methods. So, yeah, I think that's where I've seen it work the best, is sort of that hybrid model.
That's a good call out, Mike. It's essentially just the good, better, best product offering. You see this all the time. 1 license, you can just self-convert. 2 to 10, like you can pay a little bit more. And then like their third option's like call us. Enterprise, call us.
Yeah. No, it was cool because at the roundtable earlier, we were talking about like how to implement a product-led growth strategy. And in kind of the questions that we had, there was something that came up around like reviews. And it got my wheels spinning of, man, if we're in a sales-led motion, why couldn't we capture like NPS scores and CSAT and like reviews of our product in our products all the time. And I don't think I've ever seen a company productize that, where you have some public facing review site about your own product of people actually talking about your product in your behalf that you're exposing to the world. That could work out negatively if you have bad reviews. But if you think about it from like, let's say your goal was to increase product qualified leads, and you're in B2B and you're really winning in construction, but you suck in healthcare, right? Just as a random example. Well, you could work with your SEO team to figure out like, how do we make these pages indexable? How do we make these things filterable to where I can see where customers like me, what are they saying about your product? And now you're almost creating kind of like a top of funnel filter for who you have coming into your product. And so like your conversion rates could go up, the people that your sales team is talking about. I'm just spitballing here. This literally came out of the conversation from a minute ago, but it opened up my mind to like, how could you do things that maybe aren't traditionally thought of as like PLG, but you could leverage your product to get data that you could surface up to use for acquisition or to feed back to product marketing of how do we tighten up our messaging and positioning through the language that our customers are using. And so just thought I'd share that just because it came up a few minutes ago, but I don't know if there's anything you guys want to piggyback off that.
Yeah, I think we didn't talk about this in depth at the roundtable, but leveraging also other things like community advocacy, partner network. I think there's other ways that you can subsidize sort of a sales-led organization through those means in conjunction with a good product. So I think I'm seeing a lot of platforms do that now, where they're sort of building community and really like injecting that into the product experience. Yep.
Community-led growth is a term I'm starting to hear.
Oh,
for sure.
There you go.
Another acronym.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we've talked about this a little bit, but just to kind of double click on it and see if there's anything else that would come up. What needs to shift to start evolving from being primarily sales-led as an organization to, over time, moving to a product-led organization?
Understanding by the company of what that means and what it looks like and the benefits of it. I think we said this earlier that, progress can be made when people feel like you're all on the same side. So how do you get on the same side? Being on the calls with them, being in the pits with them, helping them see what you know. I think that's like step one of getting there.
Yep. I mean, for me, it's, I think back to the point, if you are seeing resistance from the C-level, let's say, are you, maybe it's just taking the initiative as a product team, depending on, of course, like how much autonomy you have in your org, but really driving growth and interjecting that throughout your roadmap, I think is key. This is going to sound cheesy, but almost like creating a movement of product-led growth if you are seeing resistance from leadership. Doing things as small as just rapid experimentation or trials, things like that. I think product teams can sort of own on their own and show the benefits to the company. So,
yeah. Just don't be working at what was it, Tesla?
Yeah.
No, SpaceX, and write a letter to the CEO. That kind of activism may not function.
No, I think to kind of double down on that point, right? Like you need leadership alignment around like the why, and then once you understand why you need to make this shift, then it becomes a question of how. But I think a lot of times we start at a very tactical level of like, how should we go about this, without first asking the question of why should we do this, and what's the qualitative and quantitative signals that we're getting that tell us that we should do this. Is it a runway issue with a venture-backed company? Is it like we have these goals and we're going in the other way of our goals? So like, what is the real driver? And like, are we championing PLG because we want to say that we've built PLG into our company, or are we championing it because it's actually going to solve a problem for our business and add value to our customers? So I think that's it. If we want to open it up for questions.
I'd be curious too, a show of hands, how many are PLG primarily?
How many companies?
In your org or?
It's new.
Yeah.
we got one. That's cool.
And sales, I guess, primarily.
Mostly. Anybody marketing led or community led? No? Okay, not yet. All right.
Was it Mad Men? Marketing led?
Okay, is it fair to say that the maturity of the market and buyer persona dictates the transition to product-led? If so, how can you progressively educate your buyer? I think this is something that we talked about a little bit in prep, and I think a question I even put in our document. Is it fair to say that the maturity of the market and buyer persona dictates the transition?
Certainly at Crexy. I mean, our example oftentimes is we have a lot of brokers who are just beginning to stop using fax machines, and we're thinking that they're going to like sign themselves up online. Like, it doesn't work for that part of our customer base. So I think it is fair to say, I suspect that will start to become less and less the case over time. The majority of people entering even the broker space know how to use, phones, the internet. It's, expect it. In fact, starting to be expecting that they can just go online and do everything they need to do without having to talk to anybody. So I think it is exactly that. It's definitely right now it does exist in some industries, and I definitely expect over time that that's going to go away.
I think we've seen it in a lot of areas in terms of market maturation, whether it was like data analytics and how do we instrument those. machine learning and AI, and you got companies like IBM and others that are democratizing these tools into something that a non-developer can pick up and implement. So I would say that maturity of the market and how complex is the usage of the product would definitely dictate whether or not the market's ready for product-led.
Progressively educate the buyer is dangerous because it presumes that you have the ability to reach all the people who are potential buyers and change their behavior so that you can sell to them. Like it's possible, but just that's Mount Everest. That's pretty tough.
Yeah. Okay, another question. Do you have an example of when you've seen PLG done badly or a common mistake in PLG?
I can take that on. Yeah, so I mentioned the growth team at HubSpot. I think, and for those that were in the talk I was in earlier, speed, I guess, has hindered progress there, or can, particularly with experimentation. I think you can get tied down and having squirrel moments with experimentation rather than just shipping product. So yeah, that's where I've seen it. Just doing, and not that experimentation's bad. I think you have to set some guardrails though up front on what you're trying to learn, what problems you're trying to solve, what your hypotheses are, or else I think it can debilitate you.
Any startup that built it and hoped they would come is probably a good example of it gone badly. Oftentimes, if you're building something and the market isn't ready for it, your hurdle that your product is trying to overcome to be product-led, to get growth via the product, is just insurmountable. And so the customer base isn't ready for it. And so here's an example of a real estate company that was trying to use the Ethereum blockchain to help move transactions online. And so all of these things were in the way. Like you could go on and do it all yourself, but you had to trust and understand the blockchain. The transaction on Ethereum actually had to work, and oftentimes it didn't. And then somehow you'd have to know that they existed. So all these scenarios it's just not going to work. It would take way too long.
Yeah, I go back to my example that I shared in the talk earlier, where our company built a separate product for a separate market on tons of assumptions, threw a bunch of money at it, and expected it to just work because people could sign up on their own and try out the features, and grossly misunderstand what the customers actually wanted and what would actually convert the buying decision, and where was our competitive standing? Because in reality, we had a very subpar product that we were charging for, that our competitors had much better products that were actually the freemium version. So they didn't need us. They just went to the other person. They got more value for free, and they just kind of ignored us. So I would use a former company as a great case study for what not to do. Hopefully they're not listening. Okay, next question. There's still a ton of enterprise software that have no online trial or demo, even a pricing page. Are these companies doing it wrong?
I think the key there is enterprise software. So
Yeah.
if you are building something that is unique to an industry and your customers are very large, I don't know what you're going to use a pricing page for if you're just reaching out to them and working with them. Because if all of your sales are custom, then you're literally that enterprise level, good, better, best, call me stage all the time. I don't know if that's what the question was pointing out.
I had a slightly different take on it, where wrong might not be the right way to put it. Is it optimal? Right? I think about Slack. You don't think of Slack as an enterprise company, but they make their money off of enterprise customers. And so I think one question, not the only question, but one question to ask is, can we succeed in a bottoms-up motion? And can we add enough value in a bottoms-up motion to where we can get adoption create a small network that gets value out of it to where we can leverage the product to then grow that user base to where we're in a much better position to convert that enterprise deal because they've gotten to the point of usage that necessitates the enterprise package. So I think Slack, not to say that it's the best example, but to the next question, I think they're a really good example in B2B of PLG done well. So any other takes on the previous question before we?
I don't, that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah. So best example of PLG in your mind?
You just said it, Slack.
Slack's very
I
good.
mean, how many companies have you gone to like, oh, we're using Slack. Okay, we got to add a license.
Yep.
Or they just started using it, and all of a sudden the enterprise had to start paying for it because it got too critical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll use a B2B example that comes to mind is Pendo. I think I mentioned this. I like Pendo's model because they let you play with it. And
That's relatively new though. Like they didn't start that way.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I think the implementation side of it could use some work, but it made things super sticky, I think, for Pendo. And then on the B2C side, TurboTax. I guess I always think of TurboTax, I think does that well. I think they've added the human element with the product element pretty well.
Oh, Whimsical. Have you guys used Whimsical?
I do.
Oh my God. They
Love
they
that
started
product.
like 8 people. And they didn't have the staff to do anything other than product led. And as you found utility in it, and other people wanted to see the thing you did, and you wanted other people to see the thing you did, you invited them. And it just like becomes this exponentially growing thing that eventually everyone in the company, Airtable's like that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are highly utilitarian software tools that invariably you want to share. And when you invite, you are now the salesperson.
Yep. So you know how we have a love-hate relationship with technology sometimes? Miro, are you familiar with Miro? Yeah. So I love their product, and I think their product managers are geniuses, but I hate how they monetize the product because they've got it to where you could sign up, like, and we did this at Lindio, where I signed up for a Miro account. I was using it at my previous company. And it's like, oh, there's already like 4 other people with a Lindio email that use this. So now you're automatically grouped into the same account. And they monetize by saying if you have more than 3 boards, you have to upgrade. And there was already 3 boards. So I'm like, can we pay for this?
Loom does that also.
Yeah. It's a frustrating model, but I think it's genius. If your product creates
There's
enough
some
value.
models that border on dark models. Here's one that's stealth that's been in the news lately, Netflix. So I don't even know if this was intentional, but when you're sharing that password, you're getting other people to use their service and start depending on it. I mean, like rarely, sometimes people do, but rarely do you finish Netflix. So you're sharing this password and people are using it, and then eventually they'll find ways, Netflix is looking, especially now, looking for ways to do this, but eventually you've got so many users and like, you know, they get more accounts because I can share for a while and then I've got my own need for my own account. Like I was using my parents, now my parents are using mine. And then I have a family and they only have 5 profiles. So now my parents are using their own and I'm using my own, you know, and I have 5 kids, or 4 kids, but 5 profiles. So it's kind of a stealth growth tactic that they've relied on. They knew that people had many IP addresses they're coming in from. You know, it's not like they just discovered this, but yeah. It definitely created a huge dependency.
Sure. It's great examples. Any other questions before we wrap?
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.